When it comes to healthcare, the French are extremely proud of their system.
And we have every reason to be. It's high quality, accessible, and affordable. France's système de santé is ranked amongst the best in the world.
But critics say the system is hemorrhaging money. So who pays for it? And what's its long-term prognosis?
Join us for this episode of French Connections Plus, where we check up on French healthcare.
The French love to complain, but one thing they'll always stick up for is the French healthcare system.
That's because France ranks amongst the best in the world when it comes to the general health of the population. The infant mortality rate is relatively low, for instance, while life expectancy is pretty high.
Getting affordable and quality healthcare is not something French people worry about. They know there'll be a safety net for them, no matter what.
In France, health insurance, assurance maladie, is mandatory and universal, meaning it covers all legal residents.
Almost everyone has one of these, a carte vitale, which is a French health ID card, and it's become a real symbol of the French healthcare system.
What you do is you show up at your point of care and you swipe the card, and it contains all the details for your rights to treatment and refunds, which are generous and wide-ranging.
France's health insurance system is part of a broad social protection program called Sécurité sociale, which also covers things like pensions and family subsidies. Solidarity is a crucial part of the system. The government refunds 70% of most healthcare costs and 100% of fees for serious or chronic illnesses like cancer and AIDS. In other words, the sicker a person is, the less they pay. So who foots the bill? Well, largely the public. More than 40% of healthcare spending is financed by payroll taxes. A third comes from income taxes, which are relatively high in France, and the rest comes from taxes levied on tobacco, alcohol, and soda, the pharmaceutical industry, and a small amount of state subsidies. So everyone pays into the system, but people get a lot out of it. Patients have total choice of where they go for care and who they see. In other words, there are no gatekeepers. And French health insurance covers a lot. Inpatient and outpatient care, house calls, specialists, prescription drugs, mental health, maternity care, and even some forms of alternative medicine like acupuncture. The French love their healthcare.
One thing you often hear abroad about French healthcare is that it's 100% socialized, but that's wrong. For instance, a majority of French doctors are self-employed, and about a third of French hospitals are for profit.
The French healthcare system is a public-private hybrid, and that's good for patients.
About 90% of French people opt for supplementary private medical insurance called a mutuelle. Now, a mutuelle covers things that aren't fully covered by the state. For instance, when you get glasses or when you go to the dentist.
But the truth of the matter is, French healthcare just isn't as expensive as it is in other countries to begin with.
That's because the government participates in setting what it considers fair prices for appointments, procedures, and drugs.
And the government has a lot of bargaining power to keep prices low. For example, the cost of an average visit to a general practitioner is just 25 euros.
Now that means that French doctors tend to earn less money than, say, their American counterparts, about a third less. But medical school is practically free in France, and they don't have to pay for malpractice insurance, so it evens out.
Now, some specialists, like a gynecologist, for example, might charge more, say about 100 euros a visit, but you'll never see the dizzying prices you might see in the United States or in other countries.
To find out more about what the French healthcare system is like from the inside, I went to the American Hospital of Paris. And there I met with Dr Jocelyn McGinnis, an American OBGYN who's been working in France for over 20 years.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Doctor.
My pleasure.
Now, as a doctor with experience abroad, what would you say surprised you the most when you first started practicing here in France?
The use of midwives, sages-femmes here, as opposed to in the United States where we use nurses. As an obstetrician in the United States, we're the ones that are calling the shots and we're in charge. And here it was like, no, we're going to do this. No, we're not. The sages-femmes are the ones that are telling us how it's going to be managed. So it's a whole different approach to obstetrics and a different approach to medicine. I find it's a lot more paternalistic than I'm used to, for starters.
And by paternalistic, what do you mean?
I will tell you what you need to know. If I could apply United States medicine maybe 40 years ago, 30 years ago, when you had a bad malady, you had cancer, and they decided not to tell the patient, but maybe they tell a loved one, but not to tell them. I felt at the beginning that it was very similar to that. In other words, it was 30 years behind emotionally than what it was in the United States.
Now, what would you say is your favorite thing about working in the French healthcare system?
I think the affordability and the access. If I can compare again to the United States, again as an obstetrician, the United States, we have a dismal record for neonatal mortality, and a lot of that is due because people can't necessarily access the system. They don't have the money, they don't have the insurance. In here, it's very well organized in that regard. It's affordable.
And what would you say is the most challenging aspect of working here in France?
Personalities. It's different. Mm-hmm. I'm not French, they're not American. The façon is completely different in terms of how you communicate.
And talking about French healthcare in general, it's credited, as you said, with being affordable, accessible, good quality. Some say it's the best system in the world. Would you agree with that?
I haven't experienced that many different ones. I've certainly been here. I lived in Belgium for a year, and obviously in the United States. And I would definitely put France. Yeah, it's very, very good.
So the French healthcare system is currently used as an example or a counterexample in the ongoing debate about healthcare in the United States. Do you think a French-style system would work in the United States?
I think it'd be excellent. I think it'd be difficult to implement because I think our healthcare system in the United States is run too much by the insurance companies. It's very different. They don't have the lawsuit problem that we have in the United States, the malpractice issue, which doesn't necessarily make you more sloppy, but it makes you more open to be able to accept patients because you're not going to have the constraints of what kind of baggage are you bringing with you, and I think that's important.
And what would you say are the main challenges that French healthcare is facing today?
I think it very well could go broke. I think that's what a lot of people are worried about. And at the same time, there are things they could do, I think, to improve. They could stop paying for some medicines they really don't need to pay for.
Yeah, I mean, the French love to...
Oh my gosh, yes. They could clean that up a little bit and say, okay, fine, you need Tylenol, you can pay for it. You can pay for it. But that's also coming from a different industry. The pharmaceutical industry here, in terms of the pharmacies themselves, they're strong.
Yes.
They're very strong.
One final question. Would you recommend coming here to France for healthcare?
Yes. Maybe not vacation surgery and things like that, but no, I think they do a good job.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Doctor. Thanks for being on the show.
Okay, thank you.
Despite the love for French healthcare, the system is far from perfect. Critics say it's complex and hard to navigate, and financially, it's been struggling to stay afloat.
High unemployment and an aging population mean that less money is going into the French healthcare system, and that's a real problem given the cost.
France spends over 11% of GDP on healthcare, which is close to the highest rate in the world, but it's nothing compared to what the United States spends.
Now, over the past 10 years, successive governments have slashed the budget dramatically. The towering French healthcare deficit went from over 11 billion euros in 2010 to under 1 billion euros today.
But years of budget cuts have put tremendous pressure on healthcare providers, particularly French hospitals. Overworked and underpaid, many hospital workers are sounding the alarm and saying that they're at a breaking point.
It's a symbolic day of mourning for these striking hospital workers. They've come to honor colleagues who have taken their lives and patients who have died due to a lack of care.
Bobby, tu t'es présenté aux urgences pour une douleur abdominale. Et 28 heures plus tard, tu es mort sur ton brancard. Ginette, tu étais infirmière aux urgences et tu as vu les conditions de travail se dégrader depuis 10 ans. Tu t'es mise en arrêt pour burn-out. On pensait te retrouver toute reposée, mais tu as fini par te suicider.
There's a growing malaise in France's public emergency services. ER visits have doubled over the last 20 years, leading to long waits and short tempers.
J'ai dû attendre des heures et des heures pour avoir un médecin, quoi. Tout le monde gueule à l'intérieur parce qu'il n'y a pas de médecin, quoi.
Medical workers at this children's hospital in Paris have been staging symbolic strikes. By law, they have to show up for work. They say chronic understaffing and a lack of resources are putting them under severe strain and patients in danger.
On prend les gens plus tardivement, on a des patients qui s'aggravent malheureusement parce qu'on traîne à les prendre en charge. Et puis nous, on est éreintés, on est à couteau tiré entre on veut faire du mieux qu'on peut, en même temps on se fait agresser par les parents parce qu'ils sont inquiets, et la direction qui nous en demande toujours plus en étant toujours moins.
Facing a potentially explosive situation, the Ministry of Health has promised financial aid and bonuses. But critics say the dysfunction in emergency services is symptomatic of a broader crisis, and are calling for a major rehauling of France's renowned health system.
France's healthcare system is certainly a source of fascination abroad. And many of you sent in your questions, like Ricky J. Mark, who said, what have been some telling reform proposals to further modernize the system?
Well, the current government has put in place a series of reforms that are set to kick in 2020. For instance, they want to stop limiting the number of medical students admitted every year. And this should help fill what we call in France medical deserts, huge areas of the country where there simply aren't enough doctors.
But the truth is, it's a very difficult system to reform because people are so attached to it the way it is.
Particularly the philosophy of the system. Whether you're rich or you're poor, you won't fall through the net and you won't drown in medical bills, and you'll get good health care.
Now, many of you sent in your happy French healthcare stories, like Polkat, who tweeted, as a tourist, I slipped and hit my head on rocks on a small island, Marais, that's part of New Caledonia, 16,000 kilometers from Paris. I was picked up by an ambulance, treated by a French nurse and doctor, examined again the next day, didn't pay a cent. Merci beaucoup.
I totally understand, Polkat. I was born prematurely and spent my first month in intensive care, and my parents didn't spend a cent. Well, actually, no, they did. They had to pay for a glass of wine that my father ordered to celebrate.
Oh, well, we're so happy you made it this far. That wraps it up for this edition of French Connections Plus. Don't forget, if you have your own questions for us, you can always leave a message on our Facebook page or tweet Flo at Villeminot.
And we'll see you next time for French Connections Plus.